All right. Thank you for joining us, everybody, tonight. Welcome wherever you are joining us from. My name is Brian Nitzel. I am the founder of Making Things Right. And I would imagine that you joined tonight's call to hear from our guests, David and Emily, which is as it should be. So you might not know about me and my organization. So just really quickly, Making Things Right, our mission is to rethink the Christian response and responsibility to LGBTQ plus people, especially those who have been harmed by the church. There's a prominent study that many of us in this work reference that found that 86% of LGBTQ plus people were raised in the church. And of those, over half, 54% left around the age of 18 or at the age of consent. And the number one stated reason was a negative, harmful experiences. And I think that is what the Christian conversation on this matter should be about. The good news is we can do that amidst theological difference because this is common groundwork of loving our neighbors. So that's what Making Things Right is about. If you want to learn more about our organization and the partners that we work with, you can visit us at makingthingsright.org. All right, so that's the Making Things Right commercial. Our plan for the night, we have a conversation planned with our two wonderful guests. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, take some questions in real time, and we'll wrap tonight's call about 8:45 Eastern time, or that's about an hour and 9 minutes from now, from whatever time zone you find yourself in, okay? And for questions too, and let me take a little pause too. Give me a thumbs up if you hear me and see me just fine. All right, so no AV challenges the first 9 minutes. That's good. Thanks for rolling with us there. But questions for Q&A. So if you're not super well, you all when you registered, and there were over 600 of you that registered, so it was a wonderful group of people that were really interested in this conversation. It was great. And when you registered, you had to enter, what do I hope for in this call? And all of us read every single thing that you all said, and you just had beautiful thoughts. And so we really crafted our conversation based on what you all hope for in the call. So hopefully we address, a lot of what you all came here on your hearts and on your minds. However, taking questions in real time is a lot of fun as well. So if you're not Zoom savvy, somewhere towards the bottom of your screen, you should have 3 dots or something, click a window and opens up a chat feature. You can say hello to people in the Brady Bunch as you like. And then if you have questions along the way, feel free to submit them there. And Kelly will be kind of, paying attention there, curating questions along the way. We never get to all of them, but we'll definitely try to take some time at the end to get some questions in real time. All right, and I'll try to remind you of that along the way. And then one final comment is on respect. I fully expect that all of you are here for all of the best of intentions. But, sometimes when you're talking about, religion and LGBTQ plus, these are kind of spicy matters, right? And so sometimes people don't have the best of intentions on these calls. So just so you know that we'll be watching the chat and the screens to ensure that only productive, collaborative things are going on, and we will reserve the right to remove folks as needed. And the only reason for that is out of the protection for all of you that are here with the best of intentions. All right, so that's it for housekeeping. We still good in the AV? Thumbs up again? Good, okay, thank you. I think we're out of the woods. I don't know. I have my wonderful husband up here troubleshooting. He's like freaking out, throwing wires around and stuff. Who knows what's going on, but so far so good. All right, so let me set up tonight's conversation if I could, and I'm going to do that with a couple of my favorite quotes from our two guests. The first one's from David, in him saying why he wrote his book, Changing Our Mind. I came to see LGBTQ Christians as the church's most oppressed group, beloved siblings in Christ who have been blocked from full participation by well-meaning Christians who have no idea what harm they are doing. My journey led me to conclude that LGBTQ inclusion is not a departure from Christian moral teaching, but its fulfillment, rooted in the gospel's core claim that every person is loved by God. And then the next quote from Emily. Everything you know about an issue, all the theology you've been told and tried to make sense of, all the clean lines and the straight edges you pointed to, none of that matters when your teenager tells you they're questioning their sexuality. What matters is the face of this beautiful soul whom you have loved into being, eyes filled with question marks, carrying the pain of anticipated rejection, wondering if they will be okay, accepted, and loved. What matters is this young life, living in secret up until now, not knowing if their very own mom would draw near or far if she knew the truth. So let me introduce you to my two guests. First, Dr. David Gushee. He's widely regarded as one of our generation's most significant Christian moral thinkers. He's a distinguished professor of Christian ethics at Mercer University and the past president of the American Academy of Religion. He has authored or contributed to more than 30 books. His 2014 bestseller, Changing Our Mind, lost him most of his conservative audience. But since, David has grown into a leading voice on LGBTQ plus inclusion in the church. My podcast interview with David is among my most popular, thank you, David, with over 4,000 downloads. And we met almost 5 years ago, and he has been a true mentor and friend and champion of me and this work. And then my newer friend, Emily P. Freeman. Emily and I met thanks to that podcast episode with David, which proved a helpful part of her personal journey. She is the New York Times bestselling author of 6 books. I'm working on my first one. I can't even imagine writing 6, let alone 30, David, including her most recent, How to Walk into a Room, The Art of Knowing When to Stay and When to Walk Away. She holds a master's degree in Christian spiritual formation and leadership and considers her most important work is to, quote, help create space for your soul to breathe so that you can discern your next right thing. Her nationally ranked podcast, The Next Right Thing, has more than 28 million downloads, just a couple more than mine. We met about 2 years ago when a pre-release of your new book showed up on my doorstep from an author I did not know. I'm sorry, Emily. But yet how that has so wonderfully changed since. So it's such a joy, David and Emily, to have you here tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
So I thought, we'll have, I'm sure we'll get into more topical matter later, but I thought a nice place to start, which was really in response to a lot of these wonderful folks' requests, is just to hear a little bit of your personal journeys, your context of what it was like to change your mind on this matter. And if you don't mind, Emily, I'll ask you to start. You can do it however you like, but, maybe a little bit of your background and maybe where the dissonance emerged or where this got personal for you and just what that journey has looked like for you, if you would.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thank you, Brian and David. It's so good to be with you both tonight and everyone here. I just want to say at the top that I come here kind of as a lot of hats you just mentioned, but really mostly as a mother. And so I just want to preface it with that. I know there's so many of you who are coming in from a tender place, whether you're watching live or whether you're going to be watching recording. And it is definitely, for some of us in this room, it's brave just to show up. So I'm grateful to be a part of it. It's humbling. As far as me, I grew up, like maybe many of you here, in conservative evangelical churches. We moved around a lot when I was younger. But we always seemed to find a similar church in a different town that we went to. And I was part of the youth group culture of it was the early 90s, I regret to say. But we, when it comes to the issue of LGBTQ, first of all, that wasn't LGBTQ. We didn't say that.
Yes.
We also, even if we would have said that, even if that was something that we said, we wouldn't have said it because growing up in these conservative evangelical churches, we just didn't talk about people being gay. We didn't, it was as if they didn't exist, and they certainly were not at our churches. That was the idea. There was just an assumption that there are other people out there somewhere. Some of them are gay, but they're not here because the word gay and the word Christian were not used together in my context growing up. I did not have a category really for that. And so It was probably, you ask when did the dissonance first emerge? And we probably, all of us, if you had that background similar to mine, you could maybe begin to point to a few places where you started to question or wonder. For me, the first instance of that was shortly after college. I went to a first couple of years of college, I went to a Bible college. Early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, I learned that one of my classmates, who I had known there, I learned that she was dating a woman. And I had, like I said, really no category for that information because I knew that she was Christian because I had known her. We had, we're in the same dorm together back years ago. And I'm sad and embarrassed to admit that in my mind, because her life was a puzzle, I did not know how to solve. I just chose to ignore it. I was just like, that doesn't make sense. So I'm gonna sort of erase that from my mind because there's some discomfort and questions there. And I was not in environments where um, questions were welcome. And so
Mhm.
I sort of have this strange image of her sort of like from her beautiful blonde hair down to her feet, just sort of like disappearing as if over the edge of a cliff. And like that's where she sort of stayed in my memory for about 2 decades.
Mm.
And then I will say it was about maybe around maybe like 2015-ish. Um, there was a beloved babysitter that we had who ended up she watched our kids, she loved our kids, and then she went to college. She came back with her girlfriend to church. And at that point, I had started sort of reading, I had the luxury of time and space to begin to sort of read a book here, have a conversation there. And when she came, I remember she and her girlfriend visited our church. And I knew that if they stayed there long enough, there would come a moment when they would feel rejected by the theology that the church held. And I had I wrote about this in How to Walk into a Room, a really powerful, I still can't fully explain it, sense that when they walk out of the service, in the middle of the service, you are to follow them. I just sort of had like this sense. I had not changed my mind. I didn't really know. But sure enough, I don't know if it was months or weeks later, the day came and something was said from the front. And I knew instantly this is going to be it. Like my whole body responded. They were sitting next to me and they politely walked out. And I followed them out. But to my great, regret, I had not thought about what I would say when I
Mhm.
got out there. And I found myself apologizing. And at that time, I didn't fully know what for, but I knew that I was sorry. And I wish things were different. Um, but really, I would say the biggest change for me was in the summer of 2020. And I know that this is a story that a lot of people, a lot of parents could also tell, was when, like you mentioned at the top, Brian, my own 16-year-old told me through tears that they were questioning their sexuality. And that's really kind of when all the cards came crumbling down, any cards
Mm.
that kind of were left. And I'll say that um, nothing necessarily changed in my mind. Nothing fell into place that made full sense. But what did make full sense was um, I loved my kid, and there was no way on earth that I was going to allow anything to come between our connection. And I did not know what that meant at the time.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel quite sure I handled things
Yeah.
in some ways really well, and then in other ways probably
Okay.
terribly. But it was a time where I felt like um, I began to it began to crystallize in my mind that for me, human dignity was going to be of far more importance than human certainty. And it was like certainty just sort of flew out the window, and all I had
Mhm.
left was like the image of God in front of me.
Mhm.
And so that was sort of the beginning, or the continuation, I would say, of work that had really sort of been happening slowly, but now that it was sort of at my kitchen table and in my living room and deep within my heart, this was something that became deeply personal. And Brian, I'll tell you, I regret to this day that I waited until it was personal,
Mhm.
until I
Mhm.
really started to do a little bit more serious work.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember us talking about that when we were preparing it. I think you had even wrote like a blog or something about like don't wait until it's personal, but that's easier said than done, of course,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Yeah,
right.
absolutely. Any when you what did you say that I thought of? The what was your like who were some of your when you were sort of examining things or rethinking things, how did you put it? Like the certainty, it wasn't about certainty anymore.
Yeah.
Like who were some of your sort of trusted voices and resources kind of back in those early days when you were looking for language around this to
Yeah.
think about it?
Well, first I'll say I took a lot of lead from my child,
Hmm.
and that was something that was new to me because I grew up thinking like the parents are, and
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
true, but the parents know the things and the kids don't know
yeah.
the things.
Mm,
And this was a time in our life where I was like, oh, what do I not know? There's
Hmm.
so much I don't know. And how
Hmm.
can they take the lead? That's one thing. I will say, listening to the podcast, your podcast, I think it was 2021 when
Hmm.
that episode aired. And I remember, I think it was you, David, who said, everybody's experiences affect their theology, but some people claim it and others miss it.
Hmm.
Because the criticism, some criticism I've received, and I think probably you have as well, is
mhm,
if you base your theology on people's stories, it's a slippery slope.
mhm,
Hmm. Hmm.
And I received that criticism. And I would say maybe two things to that. One is, this idea that, well, Emily just changed her mind because she had a kid who came out.
Hmm.
And I would say, well, saying that, first of all, that I changed my mind implies that I made my mind up in the first place.
Hmm.
But the reality is, I don't know that I actually changed my mind, but that I was handed a set of beliefs that were unexamined.
Hmm.
mhm,
And it was when my child came out that gave me a very good reason to begin to examine those handed and inherited beliefs,
Hmm.
um, instead of just simply being receiving what was handed to me by my tradition.
Hmm.
And the second thing I would say, people have said is that I let my experience determine my interpretation of scripture.
Hmm.
And that must be nice, but also it's probably heretical. Um, and that one's kind of funny. I mean, I hold that one with such a light heart because you guys, our experience is always impacting how we read scripture. Every interpretation of scripture, it's all scripture is an interpretation, and it's all been influenced by how we see the world. And so, um, while I say like I really wish I had done some of this study and some of this work sooner, um, the second best time to do it is now.
Yeah.
And so,
mhm,
for me, it happened that this was in my living room and I could no longer sort of put it off.
Hmm.
But, calls like this, what a gift that we can come together and have this conversation and hear stories like this.
Hmm. It's beautiful. Thanks, Emily. It's really good context. I appreciate it. How about you, David? What was your kind of your personal story that led to your 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 background on this subject matter and kind of how you arrived at where you did?
sure. It's good to be having this conversation. Emily, good to work with you tonight. And Brian, good to be in this space together. Um, so picture me uh around 2010 as I was already a widely published evangelical Christian ethicist. Uh, I had helped to write probably the most widely used Christian ethics textbook in the world called Kingdom Ethics. Um, and I I was well established. Um, Part of the price of the ticket of being an evangelical was to take the conservative position on LGBTQ inclusion. But I say also that it was not terribly examined. Here's a little secret. Um, Scholars also inherit traditions. And scholars who have a lot of different issues that they're dealing with sometimes just pass on the inherited tradition without a whole lot of fresh reflection if they're working on other things. I worked on other things. Um, but after 2007, the inherited tradition became less plausible to me. Um, it was because of a number of things. One was that my sister came out, my youngest sister. Another was that I moved to a seminary where there were some LGBTQ students. That was a first for me. And I moved to a church where there were a small but rapidly growing LGBTQ population. Um, in my first 14 years of my career, I managed to be hermetically sealed off from LGBTQ students because they couldn't or wouldn't come out,
Mm.
and to be sealed off from any other Christians who could have been LGBTQ because they were closeted. So that was the first half of my career. But when I moved to Mercer and moved to Atlanta, that blew up. It wasn't there anymore. Um, so I began to feel, wow, there's a lot of rumbling about this issue, and there's a lot of not very helpful thinking. And looks like somebody needs to mute, Brian. Somebody's
I just got it. Thank you.
okay, yeah. Um, so there was a lot of fuzzy thinking, there was a lot of rumbling and mumbling, but not anybody from the evangelical world saying, okay, let's take this down to the studs and think about it. People were scared to do that. If you were a pastor, you could lose your job. If you were a
Yeah.
professor, you could lose your job. Other people didn't really have the expertise. So my work came along around the same time as Matthew Vines, who was he was brilliant, dropped out of Harvard, college student. And then don't overlook the book by Ken Wilson called Letter to My Congregation.
Yes.
That was 2013, I think.
Hmm.
Um, a pastor who concluded that he had to, if he was going to pastor his flock, this had to be reconsidered. So,
Hmm.
um, here's a story. I don't know if you know the story, Brian. Uh, a Jewish businessman named Mitchell Gold, who did Golden Williams Furniture, came and found me in Atlanta, asked for a meeting. We went out to dinner.
Oh, you did tell me this story.
And he said, David, I love your work on the Holocaust, and you write about rescuers, bystanders, and perpetrators. I want to propose to you that you're being a bystander on LGBTQ inclusion and that you
Hmm.
know better. And I like to ask for your help. I ask you to get off the sideline and let me tell you a story. And he told me the story about how he was raised Orthodox Jewish and he wrestled with his sexuality from puberty forward. Finally, his deal with God was if God had not changed him by the time he turned 18, he would kill himself on his 18th birthday.
Hmm.
And he almost did.
Hmm.
And then he didn't. And then he realized that it wasn't him who needed to change, it was the teaching that needed to change.
Hmm.
So I had too much dissonance, students, church members, my own sister, Mitchell Gold. And then I felt the sense of responsibility to do some rethinking using the scholarly tools that you have, that I had. And it blew up, a bigger deal than I thought it would, but I will never regret that I took that path.
Hmm. Your book was 2014, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty early. Since then, there've been a number of other books, and
Hmm.
there's lots of podcasts. The space has grown. The resources for people have grown. And I think one of the things that was fairly immediately apparent to me was that it was an emergency situation for parents and children
Hmm.
in an evangelical context.
Hmm.
That the system as it existed was guaranteed to produce trauma, alienation, and mental health problems for young people.
Hmm.
And so I found that probably the biggest single audience from my work has been parents.
Hmm.
And I want to say if you're a parent on this call and you're wrestling, good for you. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're wrestling and you're committed to your child. You want to figure out how to move forward.
Hmm.
So this is I say in the book, it's a family crisis, it's a mental health crisis, it's a church crisis. and we can't bury our heads in the sand anymore.
Hmm. How would you respond to Emily's statement about um, that letting people and personal experiences affect your theology is a slippery slope?
I did also get that exact same criticism.
Hmm.
Um, and part of what I did was to turn to scripture, in which, for example, Peter was quite sure that no Gentile could be saved until he met Cornelius, and ate in a Roman centurion's house and saw the Holy Spirit fall. Um, the Jewish tradition was quite sure that messiahs don't get crucified until Jesus came along.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of people were quite sure that anti-Semitism was an implication or a direct teaching of the Christian faith until they met Jewish people and got to know them or learned about the Holocaust.
Hmm.
A lot of people believed that slavery was okay because, after all, Paul said, slaves obey your masters in the 1840s until they met, for example, Frederick Douglass or heard Sojourner Truth give a speech. Um, a lot of times when Christians have proved to be most egregiously wrong is when we did not listen to the experiences, especially of wounded people whose dignity have been violated by by the application of supposed biblical truth to them.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Plus, everybody's affected by their experience anyway. We're all affected by our experience. The idea that we're just cogitators who open the Bible and don't bring our whole life to it and our whole embodiment and our emotions and our relationships and our loyalties is naive in the extreme.
Hmm. It sure makes a lot of sense. It just wasn't what I heard growing up in church. You know? So
Yeah.
it's like it's almost like our experiences. We were talking also about like um like being in the front row on this subject matter versus maybe not having skin in the game personally. Like for example, like I grew up, I loved Jesus. I was gay. I had to deal with this. I didn't have the luxury of not being able to, think about how am I going to reconcile my love for Jesus with, being gay. And you both had kids, and so it of course our personal experiences influence, as well. And I can relate to the certainty thing too, Emily. Like I felt like, I mean, like that. I mean, I didn't find peace with loving Jesus and being gay until almost 40 years old,
Mhm.
because that, um, the things we're taught and believe are just very deep in our bones. It isn't just systematic. It's like we really believe those things. And I was scared to death to get it wrong, and then eventually getting on the other side of, a crossroads where I really had to wrestle with God and just say, God, you've known me my whole life. I don't want to make the Bible say something it's not. I don't want to pass from you or anything, but this isn't proving sustainable or healthy for me. What am I supposed to
Mhm.
do? And when I eventually got done wrestling with God, it's not because I found a bunch of certainty. I just had to learn I just had to learn to trust God in a whole new way in my life and take a step out in a new direction and trust Him that He's got me, even if I've got this wrong. That's a whole different way of doing faith. And it was terrifying at the time, but it was liberating too, and now I can't even imagine living another way. But back then, like it was absolutely terrifying to consider
Mhm.
thinking a different way, you know?
Well, and because your belonging was tied into shared
Mhm.
belief
Mhm.
and agreement with particular doctrine. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, that is why so many people don't start questioning or asking, because there are not these places where that's okay. Being certain is sort of equal to, in some spaces, being faithful.
Faithful. Yeah. Yeah.
Faithfulness. And so that, so when we had a child who came out, We didn't tell anyone. And we have like good friends who are not weirdos. Like we have good, solid, like, people in our lives who love and know us. And
Yeah.
even then it felt, I mean, first of all, it was not our full story to tell, but also it just felt really like we were so protective and we just didn't know who we could trust. We didn't know where to turn. And I can't think of any other family sort of crisis moment that you can't tell your church community about. Like
Yeah.
maybe if it's something like an affair, people would hide, but it's like all these things. But it's like I'm talking about my 16-year-old. Like what, this is the thing. If they had cancer, we could come to our church. So you're telling me like that's easier? Like what? It just doesn't make any sense. Like
Hmm.
because it was actually life and death. I think that's something that people sometimes fail to believe for particular kids, especially. Like it felt life and death. There were
Yeah.
things that came up that we realized like, oh, this is, if you read the statistics on the Trevor Project, for example, they have a lot of really great research they've done. You can see like the statistics are there. Like this is a, I'm so appreciative, David, that you said this is a critical this is a crisis. And it felt that way
Hmm.
because of the lack of knowing. It was a lack of normative conversation. It was not a part of the air that we were, even if there was not agreed upon conclusions, like we weren't even necessarily looking for that. We were just looking for like, where's a community of people who will hold a large enough table for us to say words and they won't start freaking out. And I remember a time when my husband went to have a meal with our at the time pastor. Um, and he didn't even say anything about our particular family situation, but he was just trying to build a bridge in
Hmm.
conversation. But as it turned out, and what my husband felt at the time was all this pastor really could do was draw lines. Like he just, there was a bridge wanting to be built of conversation, and the pastor was so afraid to even go there because there was going to be some type of compromise made that line of it's like they were having two different conversations. And I just think about how many families who need a pastoral presence at that time, but the church just is ill-equipped to provide it.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I will say, welcome to a bunch of people that have joined late. We had a little bit of it's been the night of gremlins in the Zoom machine, so forgive us. So we had a bunch of people sitting in the waiting room that were finally getting in the door here. But the best is yet to come in the conversation. So don't you worry, you didn't miss a thing.
Thank you to everybody for putting up with that too. That was
Yeah,
quite a haul. So thank you.
yeah, yeah. Tell me about what was it like for you in your either of you, and I can speak to it as well, but in your personal lives when you did come to new conclusions, right, about things and started becoming selectively more public about that with your family or your friends or your church communities. What was the response? Good, bad, in between? Like I just curious, like how much did you, I can speak for myself. I was actually pleasantly surprised. Of the number of people that stuck with me. I think for an LGBTQ plus person, I'm kind of in the minority. Like my church experience has actually been, for the most part, really positive, and when I did come out and told people that I had come to different conclusions, I can count maybe on one hand the people that wrote me off. I can count on one hand the people that are like, great, let's get you married, and everyone else, the vast majority were in the middle going, wow, okay, well, that's not what I've believed, and that's not, the story that I've known about you for so many years, but let's figure this out, and we learned the art of just kind of um, you know, respecting different sacred conclusions on this stuff. So my experience has actually been really positive. How is it for you two in your communities and your lives?
Maybe I'll just say that um, there were losses and there were great losses and great gains.
Hmm.
It's a kind of a dying, for me, it was a dying to an old community
Yeah.
and a being reborn in a new community.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Um, I lost good friends. I lost professional respect and opportunities. Um, contracts, speaking appearances, reputation. Um, uh, the most hateful things were said on social media, just the most hateful things. Threats. Um, you're going to hell, and everybody who listens to you, you're taking them with you. I mean, that kind of thing, right? Um, on the other hand, I was able to discover a new community of people who were, I discovered, so grateful for solidarity, for friendship, for somebody to talk to. I mean, you think of the pastor who Emily's husband couldn't talk to. I heard from lots and lots and lots of people who had been shut down by their pastors, by their parents, by their youth director, by their, a parachurch leader at college, right? And so I ended up having this massive kind of online counseling and friendship thing happening. Let me tell you my story. Let me tell you my story. Let me tell you my story. And I became convinced, more convinced than ever of the rightness of the move that I had made, but also of the bleeding wound that this has created for so many people. So there was a dying and there was a rising, and I would never go back. There were losses, but there were such sweet gains, friendship, community experiences that I'll never forget. So good things.
Yeah. How about you, Emily?
That's a beautiful way to put it. I can resonate with that. I think the same is true. I will say, I think I can say this with confidence, 5 or 6 years now on this side of it. The big, terrifying, scary thing that I thought would happen has not happened. I think there's just this looming idea, like, that first day, let's say, if you're a parent and your child comes out and they tell you something about them that you did not previously know. And here you are faced with a lot of question marks. But what also is there is the question marks of not knowing what will happen. What will it mean for their future? What will it mean for my future? What will it, and you do have to grieve how you thought things were going to be, ways that you imagined life was going to go, that will be different now. It just will be different now. And I think there was a time when I felt some shame about like having feelings about that. And I've made a lot of peace with like, you just have to let yourself go through what you got to go through and find some safe places where you can do that. And thankfully I can say I did find that when I did finally share with those people in the non-weirdos in my community. They were delightfully welcoming to my experience and loving my kids. And I guess I wasn't surprised by that, but I was relieved. Maybe like who I thought you were is who you were. And I'm so grateful for that. And so I did have someone interview me on a podcast a couple of months ago, and she kind of asked, like, you don't have to say names but did you get a lot of rejection? Like, because I had a book come out 2 years ago where we shared a lot of our story. It wasn't about that, but it was part of the narrative arc of the book, How to Walk into a Room. And that was shared with family's permission and encouragement and all of that. But she asked, like, since that book came out, like, what's happened, and I was so glad to say, like, for the most part, only beautiful things. I think much like you, David, I've heard from so many parents and grandparents and aunties and uncles and sisters, siblings, brothers, people who have a loved one who this is kind of there at the beginning of the story. And there's something about like someone who is proximate to someone whose story is they're part of the LGBT community, and maybe you didn't know that about them before. There's something that like is you have a connection because there's some things now that you don't have to say. And so I found that to be true especially with other parents, I would say, because that's where I am. That's the hat I wear. And that has taken me by surprise in a good way. And so, and I'll also say, I have written books for years and have this online presence, whatever. And yeah, there are definitely, I would say the worst things are what people say behind a screen.
Yes.
They would say about, what my kid, things about my child or my heretical ways. And it's funny because I'm not even like that, I'm not out there like doing, but it's just funny how people will, any hint that you would even reconsider anything. It just doesn't take much for people to come and say their thoughts and feelings. But it's been few, and I've been grateful to have just a lot of understanding and support, and I found community on the other side.
Hmm. That's so good. David, I'm going to put you on the spot, but I can't remember exactly. So hopefully I'll jog your memory. And if not, somewhere in our prep call, I talked about why is it so hard or so scary to rethink this stuff?
Um, well, because, well, in many churches, a great deal of intensity was invested in trying to reinforce the traditional view.
Yes.
And so this is more intense than most issues that people change their mind on.
Hmm.
Also, evangelicals have a long history of being pretty intense about sexuality in general. Now you add, LGBTQ and it's, squared, right?
Hmm.
But I think people were taught that if you rethink this, you don't believe the Bible anymore. You're not being faithful to God anymore. You may not even be a Christian. And so I was talking to a builder who used the image of a load-bearing wall. Um, and you might say that a lot of people's faith has been held up, like literally has been propped up by a belief in an inerrant Bible that definitely teaches that there can be no space for LGBTQ people to be who they are.
Mm.
And it's all in there together. And so if you challenge any bit of that, the load-bearing wall collapses and the house falls in.
Mm.
What I tried to do in my book is to say that's not actually the load-bearing wall. The load-bearing wall is the goodness and love of God in Jesus Christ, which the Bible tells us about. Um, but also that moral norms like justice and dignity and compassion and inclusion and love and mercy should be the moral load-bearing wall, you might say.
Mm.
Um, and that many, many times Christians have realized that they had to change their mind to actually be faithful.
Hmm.
And I did a lot of historical comparisons, as you know, in the book. But why is it so hard? Because, well, again, people were taught that if you move on this, you're abandoning Christianity. But it also is hard because you have every reason to fear losing your community, maybe losing your job if you're in missions or ministry,
Hmm.
maybe certainly losing your church, losing your friends. Um, but there's the more personal losses, like how you imagined your future might be that Emily was talking about as well, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot. It's no wonder that people don't change overnight on this. It takes a while.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just a reminder, if you have a question, feel free to throw it in the chat. Maybe I'll ask one more question here, and then Kelly, you can let me know if you see anything that you want to tease out. One of the things that a really common theme in a lot of folks' questions um, when they registered was, how do I have better conversations with family and friends that are not open, that are not inclusive, that are maybe even doing harm in your mind? Like, how do I have more productive conversations around this stuff with my family or within my church? Any thoughts there, either theoretically or just from your own experiences, Emily and David?
I want Emily to go first on this one. I bet you have better answers than I do on this.
Well, I don't know about that.
I mean, especially these days, right? Like it just feels like civil discourse is a dying art, you
Yeah.
know, which I don't feel like it's always been that way. But like, yeah, any thoughts on how to have more productive conversations around this?
Well, I'm grateful to say I don't have a lot of experience with having conversations with those who are hostile, right? Or who are actively trying to wrestle with me on this issue.
Hmm.
So I don't have a lot to say there. However, I do think maybe more common are those for whom it's just sort of bubbling under the surface, where like we can be civil, but I know that like we disagree about this, and how do we move forward? Especially, I would say, in family. And for that, I guess, for me personally, one thing that is so important is to not do the thing that I desperately don't want the other person to do, which is to dehumanize, to make sweeping assumptions,
Mhm.
to put words in someone else's mouth,
Hmm.
to sort of have that person embody everything I know about everyone who, maybe I feel like is against me. Sometimes we can sort of scapegoat the one, maybe a dissenter in the family or somebody, and we all of our ire and frustration, and it comes out on them, and that's not fair to them.
Hmm.
In the same way that it would not be fair were they to do that to me.
Mhm.
And so I think that's one thing that's just, shared understanding of the light of God in everyone. That
Hmm.
comes from our Quaker friends.
Mhm.
Just kind of honoring that the image of God is in you, the image of God is in me, and the image of God is in our LGBTQ friends and neighbors. And if it's a Christian, I think recognizing that that God has created everyone in God's image. That can be a place to start because I think there's a shared humanity and therefore possibly a shared reminder of dignity there. And that's the first thing that kind of comes to mind. But
Yeah.
there's been some conversations, I've had to have slowly over many, many years. And it's
Hmm.
not like theological conversations. It's just like, let's just try to move 1 inch closer to one another, even if it doesn't mean 1 inch closer in agreement. But how can we maintain connection in love? What does connection look like? And in some ways, that might have to be boundaried connection.
Yep.
And I think that's important to recognize too. And that might change over time.
Um, at the professional level, I'm sad to say that there's not much dialogue happening between those who hold my position and those who hold firmly to the traditional position.
Mm.
It's just not happening.
Mm.
Um, most of the academy and the progressive side of the church is totally committed to inclusion. Most of the conservative churches and the conservative side of the academy is totally committed to not moving.
Mm.
So it's like, sadly, both at an interpersonal level and at an institutional level, there's a lot of just silence and not talking.
Mm.
Um, but in families, by the way, this is not just this issue. All over our country, people are struggling to maintain connections with family members who believe differently about things.
Mm.
Our politics is a big place for that, right?
Mm.
How people vote. Um, my students all the time talk about Thanksgiving dinner. They dread it because they're afraid about what old Uncle Bob's going to say at the table, right? So, and we're not very good at holding space and saying something like, Uncle Bob, I'm not really with you on that. But I wonder if we could not talk about that right now. Could we just talk about some things that we could agree on?
Mm. Mm.
There are times and places for everything, and not every time is the time to have an argument or a conversation about controversial things. But I just frankly acknowledge the brokenness. Sometimes the agreeing to not talk about certain things or to only talk about them very selectively in very specific kinds of contexts.
Mm.
And then, of course, when we're trying to protect loved ones, sometimes those boundaries have to be very firm.
Mhm.
I'm sure, Emily, you would agree. When your child is in the room, your sense of what the boundaries are going to be very firm.
That's right.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And that's appropriate.
And age appropriate too.
Yeah.
It also depends on the age of your child. And I think and that will change over time as they get older and then advocate for themselves and we're sort of this backup role. But um, I think that definitely changes over time. I think Sarah Bessey is the one who said people should never be collateral damage of theology. And that was such a meaningful
Mm.
line for me because I think that that's actually the exact opposite is what is happening
People are constantly collateral damage of theology.
constantly. And so to have the theological question be so prominent and have such a loud voice in the room began to be a hindrance for us and our family. It just, this like big theology in the room is like this, like another human person. And so for a while, we kind of had to like let the theology exit the room for a bit. And that's not to say it wasn't important or it's not there, but also, when we talk about theology, it's the study of God that,
Yes.
and that is not that that's a
Yes.
relational reality there.
Yes.
And sometimes when we say theology, we think of like the black and white, let's open the book. And it's like this static thing but like there is, I hold a really high Christology that, Christ is the Word, and the Word is living and active. And we're talking about the person of Jesus Christ. Like I fully believe in the inerrancy of the Word of God, and His name is Jesus. And
Mm.
so I think when we reduce it to sort of like, but what are the rules though? And I do understand that's a valid question. It's an important question. But sometimes in those early stages, especially when that becomes the only or the main question, I think people do become collateral damage. And you might not, that's not the intention, but that is the impact.
Absolutely. Kelly, do you have any good questions for us from the
I've been
gallery?
reading through, and now that the time is kind of dwindled, I'm like, so yeah, I definitely have a few. So hang with me.
Yeah, yeah.
There's been a discussion about, in the chat about when your friends and your family kind of disappear from your life, and I think we've all experienced that to some degree.
Mm.
And so that's been going on. And so as we're talking about that, this question comes up and it really resonated with me, and I wanted to talk to you guys about it. It says, one of their gay daughter siblings are struggling with what they believe about inclusion. They love her, that they're struggling with theology. Any advice on how to help them navigate that, other than to say to love her and make space? Like, how can they navigate this and kind of bring their line to new theology, I guess is the question.
Emily, do you have experience to share on this or thoughts on this?
Um, that wasn't my experience. And so I don't, speaking as a mom, like I can't speak directly to that one because that was not our family dynamic.
Mm.
Good. Speaking, I mean, as a parent, just as me, and I'm not the expert in the room by any means, but I always tell people, read these books like Unclobber, like, these books because, some of them, I think if you're talking about teenagers or young adults, they might be a little heady, right? So
Yeah.
to bring it down to like, a conversational type book, maybe like A Love Makes Room, Stacey Frennis, or Zach Lambert's new book, and then graduate up right to a Gushee, because that's college level. So that would be my thought, but I didn't know if you had anything else to offer.
I would just say, my thought is the parents are going to set the course of the family. If the parents say, you know what, we've thought about it, we've prayed about it, we've cried about it, we've decided we're going to accept her as she is.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be our family policy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this may not come necessarily easy, say, for sibling A or sibling B, and you're going to give them space to go on their own journey, share with them how you got to your conclusion, give them time, but there would also be boundaries there too. You're not allowed to do things that are harmful to your LGBTQ sibling.
Mm-hmm.
You're certainly allowed to have your questions, your journey, your doubts, your own opinion, but we don't hurt each other in the family, and so there would be a boundary there.
I would add to that. I think that's such a great way to frame it. And I would add to it, broadening it out from siblings too, that encouraging family members who are like, I so deeply love, I'm never going to reject this child. But I do have questions. And I I would always say, like, absolutely, you have questions. Ask your questions. Just don't ask my child your questions.
Mm.
They're not going to be the ones to dialogue with you about this, but I think you need someone to dialogue, and so never villainizing a questioner or a sibling
Yeah.
or a child who's wondering, like, how do I fit? Where does this fit? Like, what a wonderful thing to be wrestling with,
Mm.
always. But also knowing, like, where to find support for those questions might not always be right here in this room with the person who it's, about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good word.
That's good.
My next question is it's a big one too, a little bit bigger, but is it possible to love your child unconditionally while holding on to a traditional sexual ethic? This is where I am currently, and while I hold this loosely, and she's saying I could be wrong about this, right? My hope is that my child will feel loved unconditionally. So how can they do that and hold on to the traditional sexual ethic?
I would I would just say that first of all, I applaud, and surely we would all applaud your commitment to love your child unconditionally, because the alternative is disaster for the child and for the family relationships. Um, I would also say that parents go on a journey too, and that journey also can take a long, winding path. And how the questioner feels today on December 10th, 2025, is that what this day is?
Yeah.
Um, is not necessarily how they will feel on December 10th, 2026 or December 10th, 2027. It's a journey. So hopefully you're willing to go on a journey. In fact, the name of the organization that, remember the conference, Embracing the Journey? It's a journey. Are you willing to embrace the journey with your child? And if you're on a journey that has its grounding in unconditional covenant love, then on any journey, we have to be open to learn something new and have some surprises. I think I would also say, looking ahead on the journey, if the time comes, when the time comes, that your child brings home a same-sex partner or says they're engaged and are going to get married, and they want your support, they want your presence, um, then the non-affirming position and unconditional love may kind of bump up against each other, at least from the experience of the child. This does not feel like the kind of love that I need, because I need my parents to offer me what they would offer my straight sibling when they announced that they were getting married.
Mm-hmm.
One
Yeah, that's
last
good.
question from me, if you're good with that, Brian.
Yeah, and I was also too gonna just extrapolate that a little bit to the church, right? And not
Mhm.
to go off in too much of a tangent, David, unless you like to. I asked you when it comes to the church and sort of like the Christian church, like the difference between being welcoming and inclusive versus being affirming, and is that okay? Is there still harm happening if churches aren't fully affirming? My or a family member for that matter. I just feel like I always have a lot of patience for folks that are just on the journey with me,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
wherever they land. Like I think within my own family, I felt like they just needed to be heard. And then when I could tell my big brother, like it's okay that you don't think that Dan and I are supposed to get married. Trust me, I've thought that most of my life, and I'm still not 100% sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just took the pressure off
Mm.
that I gave him a voice to just say what he felt like he needed to say. And lo and behold, he came to my wedding,
Mm.
And I even joked, I said, you don't have to look when we kiss. It's okay. Like, like just like trying to, I don't know, take the high road's not the right expression, but I'm
No.
just sort of like trying to, I understand the
Yeah.
cognitive dissonance of this. Trust me, and,
Yeah.
but ultimately you have to trust me and my relationship with God and the sacred conclusions that I've come to and can you honor that? And I needed to sort of invite him into that before he could do it. He almost couldn't do it on himself,
Mm.
So what'd you have, Kelly?
And my last question, there's a fear when you're going through this that can be you've had this faith your entire life and you begin to look at things through a different lens. And so there's a fear, do you have to deconstruct your faith all the way down? How do what is your thought process? Do you have to go all the way, back down to the foundation and build it back? Or can you rebuild just this part? So I would like to toss that to y'all for consideration.
I'm not
I
going
certainly,
first this time.
I was gonna say I certainly didn't have to. It's funny, like I didn't like. I'm still, I mean, I know I'm married to a dude, but I'm still really conservative. So like a lot of things didn't change for me. I just hit a point in my life where it was no longer healthy or sustainable for me, and I'm just talking about relationship and partnership. I'm not talking about sex, like I'm talking about life and family and these things that were so deep in my heart, and I just felt like I got permission from God to quit staring at my navel, trying to spend all this energy trying to fix my sexuality and to just trust God that he's got me, you know?
Mm.
That was really all that changed for me. It's like I think a lot of the core tenets of my faith and my belief systems almost kind of came alive again because I was able to get this kind of big rock out of the way, if that makes sense.
Mm.
I feel like deconstruction is such a buzzword that we kind of all hear, and I didn't
Yeah.
even know I was going through it personally, so it can be a little intimidating, but I don't think it has to be a bad thing
Mhm.
to deconstruct.
Emily, what do you say about that one?
Well, I think that's a deeply personal question and I probably, if we asked 100 people, they would answer it 100 different ways.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so to say, do you have to deconstruct all the way down or not? Do you not? It depends on the person, and what that looks like. And also depends on what you mean by deconstruct.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because I think, the way that I understand deconstruction outside of the current way that we use it in culture is that's just what it looks like to be a person of faith. It's always sort of questioning and circling around and, examining and re-examining. That's not always been my experience in my church communities, but in my
Yeah.
own kind of personal life in other areas, I feel like that's kind of always been. And the interesting thing is, in my experience, what happens in the deconstructing process is God. I always experience God as larger than I realized. The table is wider. It's like the narrative arc of God is always more inclusion, not less. And so if that's, but weirdly, like that's kind of been the deconstruction is God is not getting smaller. Faith, things are not getting less. Things are being more abundant. There's more than what I thought. It's better than I imagined. And so, in some ways, I would hope that would be everyone's experience, no matter what you call it.
Mm.
That's really good. I was only forced to just because I had to look at something that wasn't life-giving,
That's right.
right? And so those are the things that I would want to look at and question and examine, not necessarily like everything.
I want to be honest to say that in the post-evangelical space, which is millions of people now, people who have left evangelical churches over LGBT inclusion spread out across the spectrum in terms of how radically they question everything after that.
Hmm.
And we all probably know people who they're not sure they're Christians anymore. They're not sure they want to be in church anymore. They're not sure about the Bible. They're not sure about anything.
Mhm.
Um, and and so, but there's a lot of other people, a majority, I would say, who are like, no, I just needed to rethink this.
Mm.
In rethinking this, my understanding of the Bible, as you said, Emily, actually got richer.
Hmm.
My understanding of who God is actually got fuller. I got brought back um, to the character of Jesus in a way that was very fresh for me.
Mhm.
Mm.
You know, um, I began to see what was really central. I do think that a kind of flat Bible inerrantism in which Leviticus 18 carries the exact same authority as the Sermon on the Mount does not usually survive engagement with LGBT inclusion.
Hmm.
But it was never good in the first place,
Hmm.
in my humble opinion.
What do you see, in the church today, David? Like, where do you see maybe specifically in the denominations or the boroughs of the Christian church that are not yet to be inclusive? Like, what are the challenges there, or what's the hope that you see there?
Um, a major development of the last year and a half has been that the United Methodist Church finally resolved its arguments.
Yep.
They are splitting to some extent, but the United Methodist Church as a denomination decided to be inclusive after 40 years of discussion.
Hmm.
That's a big deal. Um, the non-Southern Baptists in the South are leaning towards inclusion. Most of the mainline denominations have settled the matter in the direction of inclusion. Um, the growing post-evangelical movement, filled with people who have had to leave or been forced out of evangelicalism, is committed to inclusion. Public opinion polling is showing probably a third or less of Americans would like to roll back the gains on like gay marriage. Um, so, but I do think that some sectors of conservative Christianity are getting more hardline,
Hmm.
and there's a kind of a spiral there. It's like they feel, well, either they feel marginalized and feel absolutely determined to try to win, even though they're not going to, or maybe they feel like in a more conservative era, they might be able to roll back everything that has happened since 1960, including gains for LGBT inclusion.
Hmm.
But my goal would be in every community in America that LGBTQ Christians would find a number of choices of good, safe, welcoming, inclusive churches where they would be treated just like everyone else. That also answers your other question. A church, the goal should be that you, Brian, should be treated no differently than me in a church, and that is everything from membership to leadership to ordination to marriage. That's the goal. Other than if it's not that, there is some discrimination that is still surviving.
Yep. Still second class
You're
citizen
still second
status.
class,
Yeah. Yeah.
and eventually that'll come and bite you.
Yeah.
Eventually, people will discover to their pain, oh, they said they were welcoming, but just not this welcoming, just not fully welcoming. They're just not welcoming me with the same enthusiasm they would welcome a straight couple or a straight person.
Yeah.
So it's better than hateful demagoguery from the pulpit, but it's still not the end goal from my perspective.
Hmm. How about you, Emily? What does faith community look like for you today?
Um, my personal faith community.
Hmm.
So we have found the last 3 or so years a quiet home among the Quakers here in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Cool.
And it was, in some ways, John and I are like, I think we've always been secretly Quaker and we didn't realize it. There's, and I would say that mainly in the practice, there's shared practice there of sort of, I've often practiced my own like personal silence, but going into a space where there's communal silence has been really healing for us. And by the way, we go to what they call um, a semi-programmed service. For those of you who are not Quaker literate, which is most of you
I'm
probably.
very ignorant, so I'm like, please
Yeah.
spell it out a little bit.
No, when you say Quaker, you can mean a whole lot of things. Just like when you say Christian, you can mean a whole lot
Yes,
of
yes.
things. And so there are some, Quaker communities who maybe just are more like all about like social justice and they leave God out of it, which, how about we can do it all. But then there's others who, might just look like your regular evangelical church that you walk into. So there's like lots of different iterations.
Yeah.
But some Quaker meetings are like non-programmed, where it's just you sit in silence, and then maybe someone might have something to share, and others are highly programmed. So we go to a semi where we have like some normal things you would expect, like a short sermon and singing and prayer. But then also we have about 15 or 20 minutes of held communal silence. And we have, that was a place where we found ourselves several years after we left our church. And it was really healing in a strange and really beautiful way, just sort of holding silence in a community of other believers, kind of all facing in the same direction. So that's kind of where we have found a home these days.
That's so great. At the risk of going a minute or two over, thank you everyone for hanging with us, by the way, especially the latecomers. Sorry, we had a hard time getting you in the waiting room. But a real common theme of everyone, that a lot of people that signed up here, is just being right in the middle of this, right? Not at the end of it, but in the middle of it. So if you any just advice from your heart, or anything that comes to mind for you, for any folks on the call here that are still, really, really wanting to be faithful to God and to their beliefs, and really wanting to love their kid or their loved one or their neighbor well, and haven't been able to bring those two together yet. Just any thoughts from your heart for them, just as a closing remark.
Well, I would say briefly how grateful I am to see people here on this call. I think this work is so vital, not just for the sake of the church or for the sake of families or for those who I believe are vulnerable members of the church, which would be the LGBTQ members, but also for the sake of our own souls. Like there's something that we're
Yes.
missing when we're not hearing the voices and living life among the giftings of those who are part of the LGBTQ community. And that's something that took me several years to realize, that like, oh, I'm not just like, you know, doing this work for the vulnerable. I'm doing it for like myself. Like this is enriching my life. And so I hope that can also be a shared experience among those who are here tonight, because with the hundreds that are in here now and that will watch the recording, that has a ripple effect in communities all over.
Yeah, so good. David, parting thought?
I think that one of the things that I've learned is that people need to know that they have permission to go on this journey.
Yeah, yeah.
And hopefully an event like this helps you feel like, okay, I'm not crazy. There's a lot of smart, thoughtful, serious Christians who are also on this journey. And even if somebody says, don't even consider going on the journey, I'm going to go on the journey for the sake of those that I love and for the sake of my own soul. That dissonance that makes you feel uneasy about continuing in the traditional view should be taken seriously, and go on the journey. And and know that you're among millions and millions of people around the world who are doing the same thing.
Hmm.
And in the end, the outcome is more life and more wholeness and more love and healthier relationships and less harm.
Hmm.
And that's a good thing to be a part of.
That's wonderful. That's a great way to end. Thank you, David. Thank you, Emily. Thank
Thank
you
you.
both for joining us tonight. Just so you all know, we will send out a replay of the event. So for those of you that we didn't let in until halfway through, I apologize, but you'll get a recording. And we'll get with David and Emily and send you a couple of curated resources of theirs and others that they might recommend for you to check out. But thank you both very much. It was really nice to just hear more from your hearts tonight. And thank you everyone for joining us, because these kind of are no fun without anybody. So it was really good to see all your faces. Have a happy holidays to all of you, and have a good night, everyone. Thank you.